Recording. All right, welcome everybody. We are going to be digging into both the book a little bit here in this video, and we also are going to work on installing our software to get our work done. The book that we've chosen is the one that you see up on the screen here. I happen to buy this one direct from the publisher in PDF format, which is highly recommended, by the way. I'm very happy with that purchase. I like having a PDF version of a book because it's very easy to put in a cloud drive or put on your phone or whatever. You can access it in a lot of different ways. I chose this book for a number of different reasons, partially because of the recommendation of some other coders that I know that used it as a really helpful tool. Also because it focuses on what we call the .NET Core libraries, which are the cross-platform libraries, kind of a new thing for Microsoft, but a very welcome thing, especially for those in the Mac environment. I'm going to be talking about like the contents of the book kind of incrementally here. They have a bunch of little tidbits, and I don't know how you guys are about reading books, but whenever I get the textbook and I pay money for it, sometimes I get my books for free. This one I actually have to pay for, but whenever I pay for it, I like to read it, for sure. I really like to take the time to put in that effort. The author has a very conversational style. He did this partially because of his own interests. So he was exploring these technologies. He would create blog posts about all of his experiences, and then eventually conglomerated all that information into creating this book. And you can read up on the author yourself. You can see table of contents. I'm scrolling through right now. All right, and I'm going to get into some of the intro areas here. So you see I'm scrolling pretty quickly. I should probably use the table of contents, but sometimes I'm not that clever. All right. So the first thing I'm going to point out is, when you're in these like intro areas of the book, there are a couple of things that he points out. So the one thing he points out is he makes this rudimentary assumption that you're learning this because you want to add like web app development to your skill set, and that you probably already know how to code. And that's a pretty safe assumption. And normally I would not try to teach this to somebody who does not know how to code or understand the principles. So that's kind of one of the precursors. The language that Microsoft considers its primary coding language is C#. It's a variant of the C language, but it's kind of a combination of C program language structure combined with Visual Basic like Microsoft-y kind of stuff, right? And if you guys ever learned how to do Visual Basic, whether it was like VBA or regular Visual Basic, you'll know what I'm talking about when you see some of the libraries. Now, most of our web students these days do not learn those technologies, but our software students absolutely do. C# really is the primary coding language for Windows. It is the language that Microsoft uses to create Windows and all of their native applications. We will do a little bit of a piece in this class, not a long one, by the way, that will cover all the fundamental language features of C#. And we're going to try to do it in like 1 week time frame. And that we're going to try to start it tonight. But if not tonight, then next week we'll kind of do that. And I'll give you a whole bunch of reference materials on it. So for those of you that want to do a little bit of self-study, having a good C# resource like W3 Schools is actually a very good one for C# is helpful, right? So you can get like some of the basics from there. The focus here is not to code a lot of C# though. We're really going to be using higher level tools, but sometimes you need your app to do stuff and you have to dig into the code to make it do stuff. And that's a pretty normal kind of thing. All right. He walks through here about how the book is organized and what exactly he covers in every chapter. You will notice that some chapters will have coding involved, but the first 2 chapters don't. He talks a lot about the history of .NET, .NET Core in chapters 1 and 2, why to use it, where it came from, et cetera, how it works. And then when we get into chapter 3, we then start building stuff, right? So if you're looking for what should I do first, right? Well, install software first. And then I would say, read the first 2 chapters of the book to get that fundamental knowledge, kind of incorporated. I will lecture over it, but it's not going to be like super deep. You know, I'm going to make an expectation that at this level, people that reach this course have the ability to read and absorb the content on their own. I will basically reinforce what I think is key to the technology and how it works, rather than waste your time on details, right? You can figure those out on your own. All right. The other thing that he kind of digs into here, and here's where, you know, I'm going to be taking these links basically and extracting them from the book and putting them into the course shell, by the way. But if you have electronic access to the book, like I do, there is this link here, and I'm going to start dropping this stuff in the chat. If you guys want to capture it, you know, feel free. So he's all the code for the book is available on his GitHub. Yay, right? So that means any of the examples that we do in the book, it is helpful. So I'll be real frank. It's kind of cool that the solutions are provided. Our previous book was the same way, right? And so there's this temptation to not manually code it. Okay. And you know what? There will be times where I revert to copy pasting because, hey, you know, it's just faster, right? But then there's times where one of the aspects of Visual Studio that's so cool, especially the latest version, it is somewhat infused with AI. Like if you guys are used to IntelliSense, Visual Studio 2022 practically writes the code for you in C#. It is just amazing, right? It blows me away. It guesses at what you want, and it's usually right. You know, and it's kind of hard not to just push the tab key and go with it. However, when we get to more complicated, lengthy blocks of code that are very, very syntax specific, it sometimes actually makes sense to copy paste it in. So we will use some of these resources. That's one of them. The other one is that the source code, you can also go here, all right? And I should probably, I don't know if you guys are pulling this out of the book. I'll just drop it in the chat so you guys can take the lazy approach. But if you land here, this is the publisher's website. You can also download the code from here, right? Now, you can also save yourself the trouble because I have dropped that zip file is right here, and that's in the course resources. I will be building out these this area significantly with all the stuff that I have. I'll put in links to the book, to the GitHub, to the zip. I would recommend you grab the zip file, pull it down to your hard drive, and just have it handy. I think I did that yesterday, and let me just see if I have that. It's just for example, I did download it yesterday right here. And as you go in here, what you'll see is all the chapters where there's code, and then if you dig in, all the applications are here, right? So the beauty of this is as we're building stuff, because we're going to follow his footsteps, basically, is we have a reference to look at. So it's like, what did I do wrong? Oh, I typed that wrong, or I used the wrong whatever, right? And we have that reference. So that's really handy. The other good thing is if we don't make it all the way through the book and you want to ramp up your skills even higher, I mean, all the examples are there. The pattern by that point will be set, and you guys are clever enough at this point to kind of figure this stuff out on your own. Now, I will also say, and I'm just saying this as a point of caution, that often when people publish this kind of book, this is why there's a really big difference in the cost between a textbook and a book that you walk into Barnes and Noble and buy off the shelf. The one that you buy off the Barnes and Noble shelf, and I've done this many times myself, I buy a book on some language or thing, and then I try the code, and I'm like, this code doesn't even work. You know, right? Because maybe it did work at one point, but it never fixed it or whatever. Whereas a textbook pretty much always works, you know, and that's why you pay more money for it, right? Because everything is completely vetted, right? So those are the resources, by the way. Okay. I think all of that is really handy. Now, the other thing that I think is pretty darn cool, and I was exploring this yesterday, and it kind of makes me real frankly feel a little silly for buying the book now, because if I would have known this link was out there, and I'm just going to go ahead and actually click through on this. The book is also completely available online as a website. Right now, you feel silly for having spent the money, but you know what? You know, this guy put effort into the book. 30, 40, $50 for a book is really not a lot of money compared to the effort that goes into it. So it is worth paying for it. The fact that they give you this as a resource online is fantastic. And I'm really at this point, real frankly, debating whether or not I'm going to like lecture off the physical PDF, probably, or if I'll lecture off the website where he puts like one chapter is basically on one page, and it's the same graphics, it's the same wording. And then if you set up an account here, you can also view what he calls the live book features. I'm not sure exactly what that is. It's a combination of code and discussion forums. So if there's problems, you can talk to others who are having the same issue. So we'll explore this as we go forward. But you know what? I think this is really darn cool, this aspect. So if you spent the money already, I'm sorry, but there you go. Live and learn. All right. He talks about those live discussion forums here, by the way. I would encourage you to participate in that, especially if you're doing stuff on your own and get stuck. Here's the author. And then as we kind of dig into the material here, and I forget where he actually mentions this, and maybe I'm going to back up here a second. All right, so I guess we're still in the intro section here, but I read this right yesterday as I was looking at this. And the one thing that resonated with me quite a bit, he says, I assume that in addition to working knowledge of C# and .NET, you have some knowledge of common object-oriented practices and a basic understanding of relational databases in general. So you guys at least hopefully have completed the database class successfully to be in this class. So you get a little bit of SQL. When we say the word query, it doesn't like mystify you, so that's actually very, very helpful because, one of the grand goals of writing applications is usually to interface with the database. Object-oriented, we teach that both in the Python classes, but also much more heavily in the Java class. And you will see that at least the C# stuff is very, very, very Java-like, just syntax differences, some operational differences as well. But interestingly, because I know, Jonathan, you were in the Swift class, there's some correlations to Swift also in C#, in at least the newer version. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see. He also says he assumes a passing familiarity with HTML and CSS and JavaScript, right? And I'm going to say that, that's pretty important. But what happens in these types of tools is many times we are dragging and dropping components into our code and then adding logic to them through C#. And some of this stuff is kind of automatically generated. And if you have not worked with web pages inside of Visual Studio, man, it's revelatory, right? Like you have a style sheet and you want to add it to your web page, and you just drag and drop it into the document and boom, it's all linked up and you don't have to worry about the syntax and it's correct. There's things like that that really make it pop. All right, so those are kind of some of the precursors. All right, let me just do a really quick pause here. All right, so the next part of what we're going to do here is in the book, we are going to jump to Appendix A. And Appendix A is where we get ready to code, right? And as you can see from the title here, he doesn't intermingle this into the content of the chapters, but he talks about what tools to use, what libraries to install. I do already have Visual Studio installed, and that's going to be my recommended and preferred IDE for this class, but he does give you options, and it's not the only tool that you can use. So this is one of the side benefits of .NET Core becoming, I'm not sure if it's open source, but it is multi-platform, it's platform neutral. All right, so what we're gonna first talk about here, and I'm just kind of looking at all of this stuff, is making sure that we get the .NET SDK installed. So I'm currently working here on a Windows 11 machine. I already have Visual Studio 2022 installed. So I think maybe the good precursor here is to make sure that everybody has that installed. So I'm going to start by actually taking us over to the web browser here, and I'm going to have you all type in Visual Studio, and you'll notice code comes up, and I'm going to get rid of that part and just search that. Now, when you land on the Microsoft page for Visual Studio, and of course, look at, they're pushing their GitHub Copilot, right? Which, by the way, and I'm just going to throw this out there, if you guys are unaware, you can add this as an extension to Visual Studio Code and to Visual Studio. And if you work inside of GitHub, it's present there as well. Now, there could be a little resistance, like traditional coders go, oh my God, that's cheating. Intelligent people go, oh my God, that makes my work so much easier, right? And knowing how to use the tool actually will be an advantage. That's not the focus of why we're here, though, right? Basically, they have two major product streams. So the Visual Studio Code is the multi-platform environment. Now, this Visual Studio, if you'll notice, is directed towards Windows because why? I'm on a Windows machine. For those of you that are on a Mac, and I know at least one of you in the session is probably here on a Mac, can you hit this page and tell me if it brings up an Apple icon for it? You know, I could probably fire up my little MacBook here and just check as well. I'm gonna actually do that, but the product that we are going to download ultimately is going to be Visual Studio, the full product. Now, I am bringing up my MacBook. And this is really goofy. I'm going to talk through like what I'm doing here. People that watch videos don't know. And I'm going to go to the same web page here on my MacBook. I might even connect it up to the session. We'll see.
It does not.
Yeah, I'm not getting it.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I can see that. I'm not getting it either. Well, Apple people. So much for all that brave Apple talk before, right? You still have options on the Mac though. So
Oh, wait, hold on. You scroll down to all downloads. It's gonna be all the way at the bottom. Hold on. I am on the downloads page of there instead of the.
right. So if I click through and go to download, did you choose a version?
I went to the downloads tab up the top there.
There we go. Okay.
Yep. And now if you scroll all the way down to all downloads, Visual Studio for Mac.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
All right. So Mac people, you can find it there. Now, I am, just for the sake of it here, I already have this downloaded, but the version that we're going to focus on, and you'll notice there's 3 different versions here. They are all in essence the same. Here's the fundamental differences. The community version is free. All it requires for usage is that you sign in with some sort of Microsoft account. So if you have like an Xbox account, Outlook Mail, a school email, etc., any sort of Microsoft, email-based profile, you can sign into the community product and use it. Right? There's no cost involved. It has basically all the same features as the professional. You will notice that professional and enterprise, also very similar products. The big difference is enterprise has team tools built in that allow you to do collaborative work with a project team. And so like if you were working in, a coding house where you got like 20 developers on a team or something, that's probably the product that you would use. Professional and enterprise are not free. However, right? And here's the big however. There are ways that you can get license keys to use those versions even as a student. And that license key is non-expiring, by the way. And you can do that through the Azure cloud. Now, what I'm hoping to do here is at some point, we're going to take a break pretty soon. I'll get the link for Azure and show you guys how to get in there, but I'm going to skip over that piece right now. So if you really want to get professional or enterprise, go for it. If you were sitting at any one of the labs at school, I believe that we run enterprise on the lab machines, right? I believe it's either professional or enterprise. I always recommend community to the students for a number of different reasons. Free is a good price. If the trade-off is just having to log in with a Microsoft account, that's a pretty good trade-off, right? And if you're like me, you might have several Microsoft accounts. You might have one for Xbox, you might have one for school, you might have one for work, you might have one that you use to sign into Windows, right? And any one of those would work. Or you might just even have a Microsoft email account, like an Outlook account or something. So use that. Now, go ahead and hit the download on that and bring it down to your machine. And then once it downloads, you will have a couple of screens that basically get you started with the installer. So you want to run those. Now, once you get past some of the initial screens, you will end up at a screen that basically looks like the one that I'm pulling up right now, which is the Visual Studio installer screen. You can see I'm running the community version here on my personal machine. A couple of words of caution on this. As you're installing it on your computer, it is a really smart idea to check your disk space, right? And I'll explain why here in a second. And I'm going to do that on my machine. And I think I've actually been pretty good lately where I'm not like redlining all of my drives, right? But you can see I'm pretty full, and it's not like I don't have enough storage here. But like my D drive, that's like just a spinner that I have, that's a terabyte drive that I just store stuff on. And then my primary drive, which is a 500 gig SSD. I have a 4 terabyte waiting to go in here to replace the D drive, by the way. And then I'm thinking about adding a third hard drive. Yeah, that's kind of geek I am, right? Because I have an M-SATA or M2 port or whatever that's open, and it's like, why not, right? Drives are cheap these days, and the performance difference with those M2s is just huge. Anyhow, I'm looking at the disk space I have right now. I do already have this installed, right? But if I hadn't had it installed and I was looking at this disk space, if you have anything under 100 gigs, you might want to consider maybe clearing off a little space before you proceed with this. The libraries that we will install are not that huge that they'll fill your drive, but what some people do when they install software, real frankly, is they like click every option, like, hey, I think I should have everything, right? Wrong answer, by the way. What'll happen, and I'm going to show you here, is my current installation. I have a bunch of libraries installed, so I'm going to recommend some, but I'm just going to say right up front, a lot of them aren't really necessary if you're not doing the work related to the thing you're installing. So I'm going to hit the modify button and it'll bring up this screen. So you'll get this in the installer at some point, where it's going to say, hey, all right, the installer is running. What stuff do you want to install? And with everything that you install, you'll see like this whole panel of stuff. Every time you add a tool, it's going to tell you how much additional space it's going to take up, and it gets totaled up here. It is not unusual for a big installation of Visual Studio to easily exceed 100 gigs. You know, it's kind of like installing like, Battlefield or something. It can fill up that hard drive quickly if you're not careful. All right, so the ones that are of particular interest to us here is ASP.NET Core, which I'm not sure if I have that even installed here, but if you are working with other web classes, so I'm just kind of throwing this out here, ASP.NET is the key library that we want. And you'll notice that this library, is basically .NET Core, and regular .NET, and then it has all the different tools that go with it. Okay, so that one's key for what we're doing. You want to code in Python? You can turn that on. You notice I have not, right? When I code Python, I do not use this tool. But if you already have the Python libraries on your computer, you could click that box and then you'll notice it'll tell me, oh, it's only 70 megs. Maybe I should turn it on. I'm not sure. I'm not going to do that right now. If you're going to do Node.js stuff, this is something, and I'm not sure if he digs into it in the book or not deep. My anticipation would be, this is a good one to add, because Node.js has quickly become kind of the new backend for a lot of applications. My suspicion is if he does any of this, it's going to be minimal. But if you are also taking the advanced web programming class this summer, which a lot of students do at the same time you're taking this one, this is a great environment to do Node.js. It's one of the best, actually, in my opinion. If you're interested in some of these other tools, right? So universal platform development, right? So if you want to write apps, regular apps for Windows, add that library. If you want to work with C# or C++, excuse me, you can add those. You can see I don't have those on there. I have .NET desktop development. I don't think that's really necessary here because we're doing web stuff, but no harm done if you want to add it. And also the multi-platform app UI development. I think this is kind of a cool one. I have not played with it a lot, real frankly, but I have it, I have the intent, we'll see if I ever have the time for it. If you scroll down the list, if you're into like coding games and stuff, you'll notice that some of those libraries are here. So if you want to do Unity work, the libraries are there, right? People who are in our gaming certificate here at Gateway often install both of those libraries. If you're also doing any sort of data work, and I'm going to recommend real strongly, by the way, that you do add the data storage and processing tool, because eventually we will try to connect the databases. And if we hadn't added it in now, you would add it later, so you may as well just do it now. The other thing that we sometimes use is the Office and SharePoint development. I don't think that's going to be necessary here. I have this present because I used to teach classes in SharePoint and we used to code for SharePoint, so it's there for me. All right, I would call all of those the key ones. What happens is once you get that stuff in there, all the libraries or what's being added is detailed here on the side. Now, the one thing that I'm not entirely sure about is .NET 7 included, or .NET 7 Core included here. And so right now, you notice that this window has tabs at the top, and I'm on the workloads tab, right? So these are like the real common things that everybody adds into Visual Studio. However, you can go in and you can very specifically add the right tools. Now you'll notice under individual components, the .NET 7 runtime is here. So that's the engine that runs .NET 7 stuff. I think that's good, right? But we also need to make sure that we have the SDK. And you'll notice, SDK for Mac OS. I'm very tempted to click that, even though I'm not on the Mac right now. And I'm not sure if he recommends any specific tools, but you can see that any of the stuff that you see here on a list, and you can scroll this list is huge, right? Don't feel compelled to install everything. That used to be kind of my old working paradigm when I was younger. I'm like, I'm going to install everything. That way I don't have to worry. And then you go, oh, I don't have any disk space and it doesn't work right. I wonder why. So don't get into that mindset. So let's check really quickly with the appendix here. So rather than fly without a wire, let's make sure. All right, so he has actually a different approach here. So I might follow his approach. All right, so I'm going to say go ahead and get the installer running, even as it is. If we are missing something, we can add it. Simple as that. Now, let me just do a really quick pause. All right, so we took a short little break, but I was kind of like working through it, honestly, and I was reading the Appendix A stuff real carefully, and I did drop to a command line. So those of you not familiar how to do a command line in Windows, go to the Start menu, type CMD, bring up a prompt, and then I type this command that I see because I already have Visual Studio installed. So this won't work unless you have the .NET libraries installed. But if if you're a gamer or anything like that, there's a good chance they're already installed anyhow, right? Because a lot of games run on top of this. So I'm just typing this really simple command from the prompt .NET space dash dash info, and I came back with this, and I'm going to expand this, and what I was doing is basically making sure that I have the stuff that I need, and so it does tell me that I do have the version 7 SDK and a pretty light version of it as well. It says the runtime environment. I'm running 11, so this is kind of weird. So it looks like they're calling 11 10 point whatever, and I'm not sure how correct that is. I think that's pretty normal also. And then it shows me which SDKs I have installed and which runtime environments I have installed. So you'll notice ASP.NET Core and .NET Core are both present. And of course, the regular Windows stuff is present too. For me, now, if you do the install of the stuff that I suggested, you should automatically with Visual Studio 2022, by virtue of the fact that you're choosing the defaults from this main screen, the right component should be installed here. It's not always necessary to install the most modern stuff, but you do notice like I do have the version 4.8 SDK here, which apparently covers the version 7. And I'm not really sure what their numbering scheme is because the way they number it here doesn't match up with the libraries underneath, right? But I think that generally speaking, you have the runtime, that's what runs the application. And then you have one of the later SDKs. And you can see I have version 4.8 is my SDK. I didn't select that in this panel, but that's what was present as I did the install. So for those of you still doing the install, just make sure you hit that button to do the work. And then I'm not going to do it, obviously, because I'm already installed. But what I am going to do next is just talk about some other options really quick. So I'm yet to fully test it on my Mac, but I have a couple of different machines here I'm going to try it on to experiment with. So I would encourage you guys to try to do the same if you're Mac people. But if you scroll down through this thing, he starts talking about choosing an IDE. And of course, Visual Studio is king of the hill in terms of this stuff. And he does the same recommendation that I do. You just take the latest version and go with the community version, unless you have a license. Now, like I promised, I will show you how to get a license, and I will pull that up here in just a minute. But there are some other products that you can consider. So those of you that are familiar with JetBrains as a company, and some of you have used either maybe PyCharm for your Python classes, or maybe WebStorm or PHP Storm. And the way that JetBrains operates, real frankly, here, let me bring a browser up. Like if you go to their website, what I always tell people is before you download anything, come up here, search for education. I'm going to type it correctly though, right? I'm just going to do a search here, and free educational licenses is what you're looking for. And what you can do here is you can apply for one of these licenses, use your Gateway email account, because if it's got a .edu, they know Gateway, by the way, and they'll give you a license key, and then you can download anything from this website for free as a student. I think you have to refresh it every year or 18 months or something like that. Not a big deal to do, but really cool products, right? The one product that they use is called Writer, That's their C sharp coding engine. And so you could potentially work in that. Also, if you use IntelliJ IDEA, that's real close to Visual Studio in terms of capability. You can add C sharp language libraries to that. It might already be default as far as I know, but IntelliJ IDEA is kind of like what Visual Studio is to the Microsoft ecosystem. IntelliJ IDEA is to JetBrains. So that's an option. He also goes into the fact that if you want, okay, so there's the Mac thing. You can also use Visual Studio Code. Now, interestingly, I have experimented with C Sharp and Visual Studio Code, added all the extensions that they recommend, and it actually is kind of okay. And you notice I'm not super enthused about it. I still like Visual Studio so much better. But if you don't have a lot of room on your machine, Visual Studio Code with the right plugins might be a good option. I'm just kind of pointing that out. All right, so those are the choices. Now, if you guys bear with me a second, I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to dig into my archives here to get an Azure link because I don't have it handy. Now, as we sit here in class, I did add this link to the course resources here in our course, which is a link to Azure. Azure, if you're not aware, is Microsoft's cloud computing platform. They have an area within that our Gateway students have access to. And the link you can see up here in my address bar. I know that's kind of small, but it's azureforeducation.microsoft.com/devtools. You'll land on this screen. It does require an account. So if you've never signed in before, you'll have to go through a process. The registration is fairly automatic. By the way, I do have an account already set up. It is, I will tell you, kind of a cumbersome login because it's multi-factor authentication on steroids. And you can see I have to kind of get to my phone here to authenticate myself. I do find that very irritating, but it is the way of the world these days. Of course, it's not connecting. We'll try that again. Oh. And then sometimes Microsoft tries to second authenticate me also. So I'm trying to see if that's the case. You see how highly protective they are.
Yeah.
It's almost like ridiculous. And the nice thing is I've tricked their system, by the way. I shouldn't tell you that. Into using a Google number, which it's not supposed to allow, by the way. Now, once you do get into this environment, there is a kind of like this home page that they have, which looks like this, right? And I want you to be really careful in here, right? So I always say this to my students because there's all these products and tools that you get to access for free, which are really expensive products. But after the trial period, they can become very expensive products to pay for. So don't like go spinning up servers and stuff you don't need. But if you do land on the homepage, what you want to search for is education, right? And that'll take you to this education page. And then what they have here are software packages. So you guys see like how I'm navigating a little tree on the left sidebar here. And then what you'll notice is here you have access to a bunch of different, very high level products from Microsoft that are available free to educational users. So this includes everything from Windows. So for example, the first tip I'll give you is if you're running Windows on your computer and you're running the home version, there's no reason you need to be locked in it. You can actually upgrade to the education version, which is the same as the pro version of Windows. So for example, if you search Windows, notice they have Windows 10 education or Windows 11 education, and you can both, for example, download it from here. But the more important part is they give you the license key. So you can take any version of Windows, drop in the license key, You don't actually have to download anything. If you're already running Windows in your machine, you drop in the key, um, and it unlocks all the features because all the features are already on your machine. You just need a key to unlock them. Right. So
So
this
what
is,
is the benefit of using the education over home? Like, is there
well, it has
some pretty
features that the
significant
home version
features?
does. Yeah, there are extra features. For example, you can encrypt your file system. You have a remote desktop. Um, I'm not thinking of all. I think the subsystem for Linux is present, et cetera,
Oh,
et cetera.
wow.
I can't tell you all the tools off the top of my head, but it does have a
Yeah.
lot more features than regular
Okay.
Windows.
I'm
So,
looking at that.
and you know what?
I'm running home, so
Well, the trick to it really is, that home has the feature sitting there waiting to be turned on. So they don't deploy different versions; they deploy one version.
okay.
And so, so if you have that license key, that never expires, by the way, and you have
Oh,
access to a
awesome.
Windows 11 key and a Windows 10 key. And then if you actually dig in here, and not that I'm trying to coach you on different things, but you can also download Windows Server as well, right? So if you're a geek and you want to run your own server at home, here you can get like the data center. This is like what people run in big data centers. You can get that version and load it up on your own server, and you're off and running, and it's free. And that is not a cheap product, by the way. Very, very expensive. All right. Long story short, um, here you can also get Visual Studio keys. So if you type Visual Studio, you will notice the enterprise version is here, right? And then what you do is you simply click here, click the view key button, and then you could download the enterprise version, for example, and use that key to unlock it. It is also a non-expiring key, to my understanding. They used to give you um, keys for all sorts of stuff. And I'm noticing here Visual Studio for Mac is here as well. Visual Studio Code is here as well. The community version's also here. I'm not sure why they don't have the 2022 community, but whatever. I still recommend the community version because, folks, it's the same product. It's just how you unlock it. The only advantage of having the Enterprise or the Pro is that you don't have to log into the product, but you still usually choose to anyhow. So why not just use the community version and just be done with it? But this is good to know, right? And please feel free to explore all the different stuff they have here because it's not a little. There's a lot of stuff here, and they also have all sorts of other tools and learning platforms. And then if you ever really want to dig in and spin up a server or go into a no code environment, all that stuff is here. I did share the link once again inside of Brightspace so that there's access to Azure. You do have to sign up, right? But the sign up is fairly automatic. All right, enough about Azure. Now, because we're kind of getting to the tail end of the class here, I am going to spin up Visual Studio and just launch it up on the screen. I just want to give you guys a really, really quick tour of it. And you can see I've done work in here before where I've coded, I was teaching a C# class for WCTC out in Waukesha. And so all the stuff you see on my quick launch screen here is just remnants of their coursework, basically. Now, what's fascinating about this is I'm going to go ahead and continue without code right now. So I'm just opening up the tool. I'm not loading a project into it or anything like that. And I just kind of want to show you the environment, basically. So typically when you're working in this environment, the screen's kind of broken into a few different areas, very typical for an IDE. Maybe it would actually behoove me to open up something so you guys could, look at, some code up on the screen. So I'm loading up. This is a console app, by the way. So that means it doesn't run in a window and it doesn't run on the web. This just runs in a console, right? So it's a command line program. But basically you have your coding window. You have what you call your solution explorer here. When we work with web stuff, this side panel here will split into two and we'll have a properties window at the bottom also for all the graphical components. And then your console output and extra tools pop up down here. There is a super rich feature set that's kind of mind blowing, actually, when you start digging into it. But this is kind of what it looks like and how it operates. Um, we're not going to like dig into building an app tonight or anything like that. We just really don't have enough time for that. But I just want to give you a super quick tour of the product. Once you have it up and running, it's not really very hard, for example, to build software, you know. So for example, if I did want to create a new project, you come in here, you choose the languages that you want and what you're building for. You know, what your publishing platform is. Are you publishing to the web? You know, so for example, here I'm publishing to the console, but I want to publish to the web, right? And then it brings up all the different project templates that traveled with whatever you installed. And you can see there's a lot of them. And the thing that gets mind-boggling about it is this isn't even all of them. This is like tip of the iceberg, right?
Can I ask you a question quick?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I saw there was development for iOS. Does that mean you can develop with Swift in this?
You know, I don't know if it supports Swift. That's a really good ask. It's possible that it does, right? But you can build apps that deploy to iOS. So it would, for example, use the Windows libraries to develop code that then push to binaries that run on top of iOS.
Oh, okay.
You know, whether or not it supports Swift, that, you know, in the installer, you could actually check that, you know. And I'll tell you what, that's such a good question. I think I'm going to just go back to the installer really quick and see if they have that tool, right?
Oh, man, if there's any workaround of you having to deal with Xcode.
Yeah, Xcode is a little bit of a clunky tool. I will give you that. And I'm just going to type Swift here. It doesn't seem to be pulling it up. So, yeah. So I'm going to guess no.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, it does have the capability to push to different platforms. I think a lot of what we're going to end up doing, by the way, is we're going to be working with anything that says ASP.NET Core, web app, and variants of that, right? So sometimes we'll use templates. And you know what? There's really no harm done if I just actually choose this and just build one really quick. So I'm just going to go ahead and just do this. Turning off HTTPS and not turning on Docker, right? Which .NET, I'm going to go to .NET 7 and click create. I'm just going to show you like how automatically it kind of creates things. And you'll notice right off the bat that it creates a pretty involved folder structure. And I should not say the word folder. It's a project structure, right? So it's not really files and folders. It's assets of the project, right? And you will notice that it has pre-built web pages. They're not quite called HTML, if you're noticing. And a lot of them, for example, like there's an index page. It not only has the code, so here's an example of the code page. Let me see if I can, well, I'm not worried about word wrap right now, but it also will have a C# file attached to it. And this is kind of the magic sauce of ASP.NET. So we have an HTML file that does all its HTML stuff. And then attached to every single one is also a C# file that allows us to write regular programming code to run the back end of the website, the stuff that people never see on the front end, but generates the front end. And sometimes we do nothing in this environment, or sometimes we write a significant amount of logic to drive the application. What's fascinating about this, and you know, I could be brave here and just launching the project. So I don't know if you guys caught what I just did. Yes, we're trusting. Sure. Okay, go ahead. But basically what it's doing right now is, the other real cool thing about Visual Studio is it has an internal web server built into the product. And you'll notice it deployed directly to my default browser through a local host address. So it's a loopback address to a custom port that changes every time you launch. And what work did I do to create this? I just chose the template and hit create, right? But you notice it looks pretty nice already. It wouldn't take
Yeah.
much for me to go in here and tweak the content and make it my own, right? So this is one of the advantages. Now, this is when we're working with .NET and you're working with a template, right? There are all these starter templates that get you often very close to the things that you want. So for example, if I wanted a website that had a login system, it's a checkbox or two, right?
Oh, wow.
And it's built in. All the mechanisms are built in. I don't have to write code for it. I just utilize it. And so a lot of this, and this is a new way for us to work. Now that you guys understand the code that drives an application, you can come in here and tweak it if you need to, but oftentimes you don't. It becomes very what we call API based. So in other words, we are pulling in things that are already built and utilizing them kind of like Legos and building stuff we want to build with it rather than worrying about building the Lego, you know, which is what you learn in code. You'll notice that, like, for example, it's like you recognize, well, that looks like HTML because it is. But then you notice this other syntax. This is a different syntax called Razor, right? It's a whole different visual language for ASP.NET. And then you'll notice, okay, so like where's the doc type and the HTML tags and all that stuff? That's somewhere else. And so we're using what we call, it's not really a template system, it's an architecture where certain aspects of the page are housed, like the repeating parts of the page are housed in one spot, and then the parts that we customize are here. So it wouldn't take much from, for example, for me to like change the verbiage on what's appearing here. I mean, I would just have to edit this file, hit run again, and it would come up different. I want images, I want CSS, I want whatever. But you notice, like, just right out of the box, how beautiful it is without really having done a lot of stuff, right? So now you're wondering, why did I learn all that HTML? Well, there is an answer to that. The answer is because that still has a place here, right? Your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills are still critical in terms of, you know, where you're going to apply them to do custom work, because sometimes the tools that you're using don't create the things the way you want them to be. You still have to tweak things. All right, so here's kind of the lay of the land, and I'm, you know, kind of doing this in sort of a lecture fashion, and I apologize. But in terms of where we should be for next week, what I'm going to ask everybody to do is in your book, I would like you to read basically the first three chapters. So I'm going to be posting this into Brightspace, by the way. So read the first chapter, the second chapter, and the third chapter, and we will start doing some of the coding work that's in the third chapter next week. The other thing that I'm going to push you to do, and I'm going to also post this into Brightspace, it's not there yet, is I'm going to drive you to the W3 schools site to the C# area. And next week, I'm going to do, I'm not going to take the whole class doing this, by the way. I'm going to give you kind of like the, I don't know, the 10-minute overview. It'd probably be more like a half hour, 45 minutes of the C# language, just so we have at least an underpinning of what it looks like, right? But what I would ask that you guys do is at least go through, I don't know, some of the common stuff. This stuff reads pretty quickly once you know how to code. It talks about C#, where it comes from, what is it used for, you know, what the syntax looks like, you know, how you declare variables, which is a little bit, it's kind of like Java, not at all like Python. Yeah, all sorts of really cool stuff, how you do if statements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to do all this stuff like in super hurried fashion. The other thing I'm going to do for you guys is, because I just recently taught this course over at WCTC, is I'm going to share my whole library of videos, which covers all the language fundamentals. If you wanted to look something up, and hey, you know, if you got time on your hands and you want to burn through my videos, more power to you. I'll share them with you. And it's kind of like a free C# course right there.
Awesome.
All right. So this video will end here. And since I'm trying to build my subscribership, please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to put it on my own channel now instead of the Gateway channel. And this video ends here, folks.